Everyone believed Leonard Ellington was dead, except he was watching everything. From hidden cameras, the billionaire father witnessed the unthinkable. The very siblings he trusted turning his children's lives into a nightmare. What started as a test of love quickly became proof of betrayal, greed, and cruelty. But the moment they decided to get rid of his kids, he decided to come back. Hello fam, welcome to True Love Stories, where we share interesting and intriguing stories. Please do well to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Do not forget to like and share with your loved ones. Now let's dive into the story. Leonard Ellington had spent most of his life carrying people who never learned how to stand on their own. At 42, he was one of Atlanta's most quietly powerful men, a Black American billionaire who built his logistics and tech empire from the ground up. People in business circles respected him. Competitors feared his discipline. But outside the boardroom, Leonard was simply known as the one who takes care of everything. That reputation started long before the money came. After their parents passed, Leonard stepped into a role he never asked for. He became the provider, the decision-maker, the shield. His younger brother Darnell, now 30, and his older sister Renee, 35, grew up depending on him in ways that never really stopped. Even as adults, they leaned on Leonard for everything: rent, cars, business investments, emergencies that always seemed urgent and never-ending. Leonard never complained. When Darnell wanted to start fresh, after quitting another job, Leonard wired him money without hesitation. When Renee insisted she needed a better apartment for her mental health, Leonard upgraded her to a luxury condo. Birthdays, holidays, random Tuesdays, it didn't matter. If they called, Leonard answered. If they needed, Leonard gave. And he gave generously. Darnell drove a car he didn't pay for. Renee wore designer clothes she didn't earn. Their lifestyles reflected wealth they hadn't built, while Leonard, who created it all, lived with surprising restraint. He didn't chase attention. He didn't host extravagant parties. His fulfillment came from something much quieter. His children, 6-year-old twins, Malik and Malia, were the center of Leonard's world. They had their mother's warmth, her softness, her way of making even ordinary moments feel special. Since Jasmine passed away 3 years earlier after a sudden illness, Leonard had reshaped his entire life around them. Mornings started with breakfast he insisted on making himself, even when a full staff was available. He'd stand in the kitchen in a crisp white shirt, carefully cutting fruit while Malik asked endless questions about how things worked and Malia hummed softly to herself, braiding her doll's hair. He drove them to school when he could, ignoring calls during those moments as if the rest of the world could wait, which, for him, it usually did. Evenings were sacred. No matter how demanding his day had been, Leonard made it home for dinner. Sometimes they ate at the long dining table, but more often they ended up on the couch with plates balanced on their laps, watching movies Malik picked and Malia halfway paid attention to before falling asleep against Leonard's shoulder. But when the house grew quiet, when the kids were asleep and the laughter faded, something heavier settled in. Loneliness and worry. Leonard would often find himself standing in the hallway outside their rooms, listening to their steady breathing, making sure they were safe. It wasn't just habit. It was fear. The kind that didn't announce itself loudly, but lingered in the background, growing stronger in silence. Because for all the success he had built, for all the lives he supported, Leonard knew one truth he couldn't escape. Everything depended on him. There was no backup plan. No one else who truly understood what Malik and Malia needed. No one else who had proven they could put the children first, above comfort, above money, above themselves. He wanted to believe his siblings would step up if they had to. After all, he had spent years stepping up for them. He had given them stability, opportunity, and a life they didn't have to struggle for. But small things made him question that belief. The way Darnell rarely asked about the kids unless it led to a conversation about money. The way Renee visited only when she needed something, her attention drifting the moment the topic shifted away from her. The way both of them seemed more attached to Leonard's wealth than to the responsibilities that came with it. Leonard noticed it. He just didn't confront it. because confronting it meant facing a possibility he wasn't ready to accept. One evening, after putting the twins to bed, Leonard sat alone in his home office. The city lights stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, glowing against the Atlanta skyline. On his desk sat a framed photo of Jasmine, her smile frozen in time, warm, steady, grounding. He picked it up, his thumb brushing lightly over the glass. "You always knew how to read people," he murmured. Jasmine had seen things in others that Leonard sometimes chose to overlook. Where he gave chances, she saw patterns. Where he held on to loyalty, she quietly questioned intentions. "What would you say about them?" he asked softly, though he already suspected the answer. His gaze shifted toward the hallway leading to the children's rooms. "They need to be okay," he said more firmly now. "No matter what." That was the promise he had made the day Jasmine died. Not out loud, but in every decision since. And yet, sitting there in the quiet, Leonard felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Uncertainty. Because for the first time, he wasn't thinking about business risks or financial strategy. He was thinking about something far more fragile. If he were gone, would the people he had spent his life supporting finally step up? Or would everything he built for his children begin to fall apart the moment he wasn't there to hold it together? Leonard leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He didn't have an answer. And that was what troubled him the most. It started on a day that felt too ordinary to carry anything life-altering. Leonard had just wrapped up a long morning of meetings when he felt it again, that subtle tightness in his chest. It wasn't sharp pain, not the kind that drops a man to the floor. It was quieter than that, persistent, a pressure that came and went over the past few weeks, easy to ignore, but impossible to fully dismiss. At first, he blamed stress. Late nights, skipped meals. The weight of running a billion-dollar company while raising 2 children alone wasn't exactly light work. But that afternoon, as he stood in his office reviewing reports, the room tilted slightly. Just for a second. Still, it was enough. Leonard didn't like uncertainty, especially when it came to his health. He had too many people depending on him to gamble with something like that. Within the hour, he had canceled the rest of his meetings and checked into one of the top private hospitals in Atlanta. The facility was quiet, polished, efficient. The kind of place built for people like Leonard, people who expected answers quickly. Tests were run, blood drawn, machines hummed. Doctors spoke in calm, measured tones that gave nothing away. Leonard remained composed through all of it. He answered questions clearly, followed instructions, even took a few business calls while waiting. But when the doctor finally walked in with the results, something shifted. There was a pause, a hesitation, the kind that doesn't belong in good news. "Mr. Ellington," the doctor began, folding his hands together, "we've identified a serious issue with your heart." Leonard didn't react immediately. He simply watched the man, reading his expression the way he would in a negotiation. "What kind of issue?" he asked evenly. "A rare and aggressive condition," the doctor continued. "It can progress quickly. In cases like this, time becomes unpredictable." Silence filled the room. Leonard's mind didn't race. It didn't shatter. It focused. "How much time?" he asked. The doctor hesitated again. "We can't say for certain. Months, possibly less if complications arise." That was the moment everything changed. Not outwardly. Leonard didn't break down or raise his voice. He nodded once, absorbing the information with the same control he brought to every crisis in his life. But internally, something cracked. Because for the first time in years, Leonard wasn't thinking about how to solve a problem. He was thinking about what would happen if he couldn't. The rest of the conversation blurred into fragments, treatment options, monitoring next steps. Words that should have mattered but didn't land the way one thought did, repeating over and over in his mind. Malik and Malia. When Leonard left the hospital, the world looked exactly the same. Cars moved. People walked. The city carried on without hesitation. But for him, everything felt different. The drive home was quiet. No music. No calls. Just the low hum of the engine and the weight of realization settling deeper with every mile. When he pulled into the driveway, he sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door. He had walked through that door thousands of times. But this time, it felt like stepping into something fragile. Inside, the twins were in the living room. Malik was on the floor building something elaborate with blocks, his face locked in concentration. Malia sat nearby, flipping through a picture book, occasionally glancing over to supervise her brother's progress. "Daddy!" Malia jumped up the moment she saw him. Leonard barely had time to kneel before both children collided into him. Small arms wrapped around his neck, their laughter bright and effortless. For a moment, he held them tighter than usual. Longer than usual. "You okay, Daddy?" Malik asked, pulling back just enough to look at him. Leonard forced a small smile. "Yeah, I'm good." But his voice felt heavier than the words. That evening, everything felt sharper. More important, the way Malia giggled when he misread a story on purpose. The way Malik insisted on explaining how his block structure could actually work in real life. The way both of them fought sleep just to spend a few extra minutes with him. Leonard soaked it all in, memorizing it, as if preparing for absence. Later that night, after the twins were asleep, Leonard sat on the edge of his bed, the doctor's words replaying in his mind with brutal clarity. Months. Possibly less. He looked over at Jasmine's photo on the nightstand. "You left me with them," he said quietly. "You trusted me to take care of them." His jaw tightened. What happens if I can't? That question didn't stay in the room. It followed him. Into the next day. And the next. Leonard began putting things in order with precision. Legal documents were reviewed. Trust funds structured. Instructions written. Every detail of his estate carefully planned to ensure Malik and Malia would never struggle financially. But money wasn't the problem. It never was. Because no amount of wealth could replace presence. Guidance. Love. Leonard knew exactly what growing up without that felt like. And he refused to let his children experience it the same way. Which brought him back to the one question he couldn't solve with contracts or numbers. Who would raise them? His thoughts turned reluctantly to Darnell and Renee. They were the only family his children had left. The only option. But every time Leonard pictured them stepping into that role, something felt off. Unsteady. He remembered the way Darnell laughed off responsibility. The way Renee avoided anything that required real sacrifice. The way both of them depended on him for stability instead of creating their own. Still, they were blood. And Leonard had spent years believing that meant something. Hadn't it? One night, unable to sleep, Leonard walked quietly into the twins' room. Malik had kicked off his blanket again. Malia had rolled halfway across the bed, her small hand still clutching her stuffed toy. Leonard adjusted the blanket over Malik, then stood there for a long moment, just watching them. "They need to be safe," he whispered. "Not rich. Not comfortable. Safe. Loved. Protected." The diagnosis had done more than scare him. It had forced him to confront something he had avoided for years. Hope wasn't enough. Trust wasn't enough. He needed certainty. And as that realization settled in, so did something else, an idea. Uncomfortable. Extreme. But clear. If he was going to leave his children in someone else's care, he needed to know exactly who those people really were. Not when things were easy, but when he was gone. Or at least, when they believed he was. Leonard didn't act on the idea immediately. For several days, he let it sit with him, turning it over, testing its weight, questioning his own judgment. It wasn't a small decision. It wasn't even a reasonable one by most standards. Faking his death meant deception on a level he had never practiced, especially not with family. But the more he thought about it, the more it felt necessary. Because everything else he had tried, trust, observation, assumption, left too much room for doubt. And doubt, when it came to his children, was unacceptable. If Darnell and Renee were going to become Malik and Malia's guardians, Leonard needed to see who they were when no one was watching, when there was nothing left to gain from impressing him. So he made a decision. He would disappear. The plan required precision. Leonard didn't trust many people with something like this, but there were a few individuals who had earned his confidence over the years. His attorney, Ms. Carla Jennings, was the first person he called. She had managed his legal affairs for over a decade and understood both his business mind and his personal boundaries. When he explained what he wanted to do, she didn't respond right away. "You're asking me to help you fake your death," she said finally, her tone measured but heavy. "I'm asking you to help me protect my children," Leonard replied. There was a long pause on the other end. "And if this goes wrong?" she asked. Leonard didn't hesitate. "Then I deal with it. But if I do nothing and I'm wrong about them," his voice lowered, "my kids pay the price." That was enough. From there, the circle remained tight. A private security firm that had handled his personal protection for years was brought in under strict confidentiality. A medical consultant helped craft a believable narrative tied to his earlier diagnosis. Every detail was built carefully. No loose ends, no room for suspicion. The story would be simple, tragic, and believable. A sudden cardiac event. Fatal. The incident was staged during a short solo trip Leonard was known to take occasionally to clear his mind. The location was controlled. The reports were clean. By the time the news broke, everything aligned too well to question. Leonard Ellington was dead. The city reacted quickly. News outlets picked up the story within hours. Atlanta billionaire passes unexpectedly at 42. Business partners issued statements. Competitors expressed public condolences. Social media filled with shock and speculation. But Leonard wasn't watching the headlines. He was watching something else. From a secure, undisclosed location, Leonard sat in front of a bank of monitors. Live feeds streaming from cameras installed throughout his mansion, the garages, the perimeter, even discreetly within common areas of properties his siblings frequented. Audio feeds accompanied many of them, clear enough to capture conversations without distortion. It was all legal, all pre-authorized under his ownership. Now it served a different purpose. The funeral was the first test. They designed a silicon mannequin that looks just like him. Leonard watched it unfold in real time. The church was filled, business associates, community leaders, employees, distant relatives. The atmosphere was heavy, respectful. His portrait stood at the front, larger than life, framed by white flowers. And then there were Darnell and Renee. Darnell cried loudly, his shoulders shaking as he leaned over the casket. Renee had to be helped to her seat at one point, dabbing her eyes dramatically as people gathered around her. To anyone else, it looked like grief. To Leonard, something felt off. Not completely fake, but not entirely real either. It was performative, inconsistent, like actors who hadn't fully settled into their roles. "They're playing it up," Ms. Jennings said quietly from behind him, arms crossed as she observed the same feed. Leonard didn't respond. He kept watching. After the service, as people gathered outside, offering condolences, Leonard noticed how quickly certain conversations shifted. Darnell, still in his black suit, wiped his face before leaning in to speak with one of Leonard's business associates. "So, what happens with everything now?" he asked, his voice lower, but not low enough. Renee, just a few feet away, was having a similar conversation. "I mean, Leonard would have wanted us to manage things," she said, nodding as if reassuring herself more than anyone else. Leonard's jaw tightened slightly. It hadn't even been a full day. That night, the mansion was quiet. For the first time in years, Leonard wasn't there to tuck his children into bed. Instead, he watched through a camera mounted in the hallway as a nanny. One he had personally hired, guided Malik and Malia into their rooms. Malia clutched a small photo of Leonard, her face tear-streaked and exhausted. "Is Daddy really not coming back?" she asked softly. The nanny hesitated, then knelt beside her. "Your daddy loved you very much," she said gently. That wasn't an answer. Malik stood nearby, silent, his small hands clenched at his sides. He didn't cry like his sister. He just stared at the floor, trying to process something too big for him to understand. Leonard leaned forward in his chair, his expression hard to read. This was the part he hadn't fully prepared for. Seeing their pain. Hearing it. Feeling it without being able to respond. His instinct screamed at him to stop the test right there. To walk through the front door, pick them up, and end it. But he didn't, because the test had just begun. And if he stopped now, he would learn nothing. By the third day, Darnell and Renee moved into the mansion. Not gradually, completely. Leonard watched as their cars pulled into the driveway, luggage packed as if they had been waiting for this moment. Darnell walked through the front doors with a kind of ownership that didn't belong to him. Renee followed, already giving instructions to staff like she had stepped into a role she believed was hers. They didn't waste time, Ms. Jennings noted. Leonard's eyes remained fixed on the screen. No, he said quietly. They didn't. At first, their actions could still be interpreted as stepping up. They spoke about handling responsibilities, keeping things running, and making sure the kids are okay. But Leonard paid attention to what they did, not what they said. And what he saw raised questions. Darnell spent more time in Leonard's office than with the children. He went through files, made calls, asked about account access with increasing urgency. Renee focused on the house itself, rearranging, redecorating, asserting control over spaces that once held emotional meaning. The twins, they were present, but not prioritized. Leonard sat back slightly, his expression growing more serious with each passing hour. The shift had already begun. Grief had barely settled. And yet, something else was rising in its place. Something Leonard had feared, but needed to see with his own eyes. The test was working, and what it was revealing was only the beginning. At first, the changes were subtle enough that someone looking from the outside might have missed them. Leonard didn't. From the wall of monitors in front of him, every shift in behavior stood out with painful clarity. Patterns formed quickly, and once he saw them, he couldn't unsee them. The house no longer moved with structure. It drifted. The nanny was told not to stay often like usual. Darnell started waking up late, often long after the twins had already been up. Breakfast, once a consistent routine Leonard had insisted on, became irregular. Some mornings the kids were fed by leftover snacks or whatever they could find in the kitchen. Other times, the responsibility fell awkwardly on a house staff that no longer seemed sure of their place. Renee, meanwhile, took control in a different way. She wasn't neglectful in an obvious, careless sense. She made appearances, checked in, asked surface-level questions, but there was no depth behind it. Her attention moved quickly, always pulled toward something else. A phone call, a delivery, a mirror. The children became background. And that was where the real damage began. Leonard watched one morning as Malik stood on a stool in the kitchen, carefully pouring cereal into 2 bowls. His small hands were steady, but the milk sloshed slightly as he tried to manage the carton. Not too much, Malia said softly, sitting at the counter. I know, Malik replied, trying to sound confident. No adult in sight. Leonard leaned forward, his jaw tightening. They're figuring it out themselves, he said under his breath. Ms. Jennings, seated nearby, didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter than usual. They shouldn't have to. As days passed, the mansion began to change in ways that had nothing to do with the children. The first party happened less than a week after the funeral. It started small, just a few people, music low, drinks flowing. But it didn't stay small for long. By the second gathering, the house was full. Strangers moved through rooms that once held family dinners and bedtime routines. Laughter echoed late into the night, loud and careless. Leonard watched it all. The camera in the living room captured Darnell leaning back with a drink in hand, surrounded by people who treated him like he belonged in a life he hadn't built. To new beginnings, Darnell said, raising his glass. Leonard's expression hardened. Across the house, in a dim hallway, a different reality unfolded. Malia sat curled up on the floor outside her room, her small hands pressed over her ears as the music thumped through the walls. Malik sat beside her, trying to distract her with a story he clearly didn't have the energy to finish. It's okay, he whispered. It'll stop soon. But it didn't. Not that night. Not the next. What started as occasional gatherings turned into routine. The mansion no longer felt like a home. It felt like a space being used, consumed. And the children were still there. Watching. Waiting. Missing the one person who had made it feel safe. Leonard's discomfort turned into something sharper as he began noticing changes in staffing. One by one, familiar faces disappeared. The nanny who had been with the twins since their mother passed was called into a private meeting with Renee. The camera in Leonard's office caught part of the conversation. "We're restructuring," Renee said, her tone businesslike but detached. "We don't need as much help right now." The nanny looked confused. "But the children?" "We'll manage," Renee cut in. By the end of the day, the nanny was gone. Leonard sat back slowly, disbelief flickering across his face. "They let her go?" he asked. Ms. Jennings exhaled. "Cost-cutting, I assume." Leonard shook his head once, sharply. That wasn't cost-cutting. That was removal of responsibility. Without the nanny, the gap widened instantly. Meals became inconsistent. Bedtimes disappeared. The twins, once guided through structured days, were left to navigate on their own more often than not. And then came the spending. Darnell began accessing accounts Leonard had deliberately left under temporary oversight. Large withdrawals. Frequent transactions. Luxury purchases that had nothing to do with the children's needs. Cars. Clothes. Entertainment. Renee followed closely behind, selling off smaller assets. Art pieces, collectibles, even some of Jasmine's belongings under the justification of liquidating unnecessary items. Leonard noticed that. He noticed everything. The camera in the storage room showed workers carefully packing items that held personal value. Things that weren't meant to be touched, let alone sold. Leonard's voice dropped, colder now. She sold Jasmine's things. Ms. Jennings didn't try to soften it. Yes. That moment lingered longer than the others. Because it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about disregard. Disrespect. Erasure. But even that wasn't the worst of it. The worst moments were quieter. Harder to watch. One evening, Leonard saw the twins sitting on the kitchen floor, their backs against the cabinets. Between them sat a single plate, half a sandwich, cut unevenly. Malik pushed the larger piece toward Malia. "You can have more." Malia shook her head. "We share." They split it carefully. Silently. Leonard didn't speak. Didn't move. He just watched, his expression tightening as something inside him shifted from concern to anger. Real, controlled anger. Because this wasn't uncertainty anymore. This wasn't fear of what might happen. This was proof of what was happening. His children weren't just being overlooked. They were being neglected. And the people responsible? They were living comfortably in the life he built, enjoying it, expanding it, while ignoring the very reason it existed in the first place. Leonard leaned back slowly, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "They haven't asked about school once," he said. Ms. Jennings nodded faintly. "No, they haven't." Another pause. Then Leonard spoke again, quieter this time, but far more certain. "I needed to be sure." He let the words settle. Now there was no doubt left. No benefit of the doubt to give. No excuse that could explain away what he was seeing. The truth had revealed itself fully. And it was worse than he had imagined. But the test wasn't over yet. Because something in Leonard told him this situation still hadn't reached its lowest point. And as much as he hated it, he knew he had to see just how far it would go. By the time the first month passed, Leonard no longer needed to analyze patterns. The truth was no longer unfolding. It had settled. What he was watching wasn't temporary carelessness or grief expressed poorly. It was a complete collapse of responsibility. Whatever thin line had existed between neglect and outright disregard had been crossed quietly, and now there was no effort to step back over it. Darnell and Renee weren't adjusting to guardianship. They had replaced Leonard. Or rather, they had stepped into the space his wealth created, without stepping into the role his children needed. And they were comfortable there. Darnell's presence in the house became more erratic, but his spending became more aggressive. He wasn't just accessing funds anymore. He was moving them. Accounts that were meant to remain stable began to fluctuate. Assets were converted to cash faster than Leonard had anticipated, as if Darnell feared the window of opportunity might close at any moment. "He's not thinking long-term," Ms. Jennings observed one evening, reviewing the financial activity alongside Leonard. "No," Leonard replied, his eyes still on the screen. "He's thinking like it doesn't belong to him, and he needs to take what he can while he can." Renee, on the other hand, had settled into a different kind of control. She hosted more frequently now. Not just parties, but curated gatherings, people who looked like influence, who spoke the language of status. She presented herself as composed, as if she had always belonged in that world. But behind that image was something colder, detachment. The children barely existed in her orbit. If they crossed her path, she acknowledged them briefly, sometimes with irritation, sometimes with indifference, but never with care. Leonard noticed the shift in how the twins moved through the house. They had become quieter, more cautious. Malik no longer asked questions as freely. He observed more, spoke less. He watched adults the way children do when they're trying to understand rules that haven't been explained. Malia changed differently. She clung to small things, her stuffed toy, her brother, the memory of routines that no longer existed. Leonard saw her sitting by the front window more than once, as if waiting for something or someone. That broke him more than anything else. "She's waiting," Leonard said one night, his voice low. Ms. Jennings didn't ask for clarification. She had seen it too. But the moment that truly shifted everything came on a quiet evening. No party, no noise, no distraction. Just silence. The camera in the kitchen showed the twins again, sitting on the floor. The lights were dim. The refrigerator door opened briefly, then closed. "There's nothing," Malik said. Malia looked up at him. "Not even snacks?" He shook his head. There was a pause. Then carefully, Malik reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in a napkin. He unfolded it slowly, a small piece of bread slightly crushed. "I saved this," he said. Malia's eyes lit up, not with excitement but relief. They split it. Again. Leonard stood up this time. He couldn't stay seated anymore. "That's it," he said, pacing once across the room. "That's enough." But even as the words left his mouth, he stopped. Because something told him to wait. Not out of hesitation. Out of instinct. There was still more. And that more came sooner than he expected. 2 days later, the conversation happened. The camera in the living room captured Darnell and Renee sitting across from each other, voices low but clear. There were no guests, no distractions, just the two of them, speaking freely in a way they hadn't yet. "We can't keep doing this," Renee said, crossing her arms. "It's too much." Darnell leaned back. "Doing what? Living here? Managing things? We're fine." "I'm not talking about the house," she snapped. "I'm talking about the kids." Leonard went still. "They're always around," Renee continued. "They need attention, structure. I don't have time for that." Darnell scoffed lightly. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying," she said, leaning forward slightly, "there are places for situations like this." A pause. Darnell didn't respond immediately. Then, "You mean like foster care? Or an orphanage?" Renee said plainly. "Somewhere they'll be taken care of." The words landed with a finality that made the room feel colder. Leonard didn't move, didn't speak, but something in him shifted completely. Darnell rubbed his chin, thinking, not rejecting the idea, not questioning it morally, just considering it. "That would make things easier," he admitted. "Easier." That word echoed. "They'd be fed supervised," Renee added, as if building a reasonable argument. "And we wouldn't have to adjust everything around them." Leonard's hands clenched at his sides. On the screen, Darnell nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, that might actually work." That was it. No hesitation. No conflict. No trace of the years Leonard had spent taking care of them. Just agreement. Decision. Convenience. Leonard exhaled once, but there was no relief in it. Only clarity. "I've seen enough," he said. Ms. Jennings studied him carefully. "Are you sure?" Leonard turned slightly, his expression no longer conflicted, no longer searching. "Certain. They were never going to protect them," he said. "They were going to discard them. His gaze returned to the screen, where the conversation had already shifted to logistics, timing, paperwork, how soon they could handle it. They don't get another day, Leonard added. There was no anger in his tone now. Just decision. Cold. Final. Unshakable. For weeks, he had forced himself to watch, to wait, to be sure, to remove any doubt that emotion might create. Now there was nothing left to question. The test was over, and what it revealed wasn't just disappointing. It was unforgivable. Leonard reached for his phone. Prepare everything, he said. Tomorrow morning I go home. Because the next time Darnell and Renee saw him, it wouldn't be as the brother they depended on. It would be as the man they underestimated. Morning came with a stillness that didn't match what was about to happen. The mansion looked the same from the outside, polished, quiet, untouched by the truth that was about to walk through its doors. Inside, however, movement had already begun. Suitcases sat near the entrance. Small ones. Malik's and Malia's. The camera near the foyer captured everything. Malia stood close to her brother, holding onto his sleeve with one hand and her stuffed toy with the other. Her eyes were swollen, her face tired in a way no 6-year-old should look. Malik stood straighter, trying to be strong again, but the tension in his posture gave him away. Where are we going? Malia asked softly. Renee didn't look at her. Somewhere better for you, she said, distracted, adjusting her bag. Malik frowned. Is Daddy going to meet us there? That question lingered in the air. Darnell exhaled, already irritated. No, man. We talked about this. Malik didn't respond. He just nodded slowly, like he was trying to accept something that didn't make sense. Outside, a car pulled into the driveway. Right on time. But it wasn't the vehicle Darnell and Renee were expecting. The front door opened before either of them could react. And then, everything stopped. Leonard stepped inside. Alive. Real. Present. For a split second, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if reality itself had hesitated, trying to catch up with what their eyes were seeing. Malia was the first to break. Daddy! Her voice cracked as she ran toward him, dropping everything in her hands. Leonard barely had time to brace himself before she collided into him, wrapping her arms tightly around his waist. Malik followed immediately, grabbing onto Leonard just as tightly, his composure gone in an instant. You came back, Malik said, his voice trembling despite his effort to stay strong. Leonard dropped to his knees, pulling both of them in. I'm here, he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. I'm right here. For a moment, nothing else existed. Not the house. Not the past weeks. Just that embrace. Behind them, reality returned all at once. Darnell staggered backward slightly, his face drained of color. Marcus! He stopped himself, confused even in his shock. Leonard? What how? Renee couldn't form words at first. Her eyes darted between Leonard and the children, her mind visibly scrambling to rebuild a narrative that had just collapsed. You were, she started. Dead. Leonard finished, standing slowly, one hand still resting protectively on Malik's shoulder. Silence. I know what you thought, he continued. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried something far heavier than volume. I know what you did. Darnell found his voice first, rushing forward slightly. Hold on, man. This isn't what it looks like. Leonard raised his hand. And just like that, Darnell stopped. Because something in Leonard's presence had changed. This wasn't the brother who quietly handled everything. This was someone else. Someone who had seen too much. I gave you everything, Leonard said, his tone calm but unyielding. Years of support. Opportunities. A life you didn't have to fight for. Renee stepped in quickly, her voice softer now, calculated. Leonard, we were grieving. We weren't thinking clearly. I watched you, Leonard cut in. That stopped her. Every day, he continued. Every conversation. Every decision. Darnell's expression shifted from confusion to concern. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the cameras, Leonard said. The recordings. The accounts. The assets you've been selling. He took a step forward. I saw how you treated my children. No one spoke. Because there was nothing left to say. Renee tried once more, her voice tightening. We were going to fix things. You were taking them to an orphanage, Leonard said. The room went still. Even the air felt heavier. Darnell opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no defense for that. Leonard looked between them. Really looked this time, without the filter of loyalty or history. I needed to be sure, he said quietly. I needed to know who you would be if I wasn't here. His gaze hardened. Now I do. What followed wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was final. Effective immediately, Leonard continued. Every asset, every property, every account tied to my name is being reclaimed. Darnell shook his head, panic creeping in. You can't just. I already have, Leonard replied. Renee's composure cracked. Leonard, please, we're your family. No, he said. One word. Clear. Absolute. You were my responsibility, he added. You stopped being my family the moment you chose convenience over my children. The weight of that truth settled fully. There are legal orders in place, Leonard continued. You will not come near me or my kids again. If you do, it won't be a conversation next time. Security, already positioned outside, stepped in at that moment. Darnell looked around, realizing too late that this wasn't a discussion. It was over. Renee tried one last time, her voice breaking now, not out of remorse, but desperation. You're really cutting us off? Just like that. Leonard didn't hesitate. Yes. And with that, they were escorted out. No more arguments. No more chances. No more access. The door closed behind them with a quiet finality that echoed louder than any confrontation could have. Inside, the house felt different almost immediately. Not fixed, but reclaimed. Leonard exhaled slowly, the tension he had carried for weeks finally beginning to release. He turned back to the twins, who hadn't moved far from him. Malia looked up at him, her small voice uncertain. You're not leaving again, right? Leonard knelt in front of them, meeting their eyes. No, he said gently. I'm not going anywhere. Malik studied him for a moment, then nodded once, as if deciding to believe it. Leonard pulled them both into another embrace, holding them firmly. I'm sorry, he murmured. For everything. That apology wasn't just for the test. It was for the time they spent hurting while he watched. And he would carry that. But moving forward, things would be different. Staff returned. Structure came back. Meals were warm again. Nights were quiet again. Laughter, slowly but surely, found its way back into the walls of the house. Healing didn't happen all at once. But it began. And Leonard made a promise, not out of fear this time, but out of understanding. He would protect what mattered. Not just with money. Not just with planning. But with presence. Because he had seen what happened in his absence. And he would never allow it again. The truth came quietly. Not with panic. Not with urgency. But with precision. A week into the test, while Leonard sat in that dim surveillance room, watching his children navigate a world without him, Ms. Jennings had insisted on something he hadn't prioritized. A second, deeper medical evaluation. Not rushed. Not general. Expert. The specialist they brought in was known for one thing, accuracy. No assumptions. No shortcuts. No room for error. Leonard agreed, more out of responsibility than hope. He went through the tests again. More detailed scans. More analysis. More time. And then the results came. You were misdiagnosed. The words didn't hit him immediately. The doctor continued, calm and certain. There is no aggressive condition. Your heart is stable. What you experienced was likely stress-related symptoms, serious enough to check, but not life-threatening. Silence filled the room. Leonard sat still. Not processing fear this time, but release. For the first time in weeks, his chest didn't feel heavy. For the first time, the future wasn't a countdown. He exhaled slowly, a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. I'm fine, he asked. The doctor nodded. You're fine. That should have been the end of everything. The test. The plan. The deception. But Leonard didn't stop. Because by then, it wasn't about the diagnosis anymore. It was about the truth he had already started uncovering. So he continued. And now, standing in his home again, with his children safe beside him and the illusion shattered, he understood something clearly. The misdiagnosis had started the test, but his siblings had finished it. The aftermath wasn't quiet. News of Leonard Ellington being alive spread faster than his death ever had. Media outlets scrambled. Headlines shifted overnight, from mourning to confusion, then to outrage, then to curiosity. Billionaire returns after reported death. Truth behind the disappearance. Ellington speaks. Leonard didn't hide from it. He stepped forward. At a press conference held outside his company headquarters, Leonard stood in front of cameras, composed and direct. The same man who had built an empire now faced the public, not as a businessman, but as a father who had made an extreme decision. "I owe the public, my company, and this community the truth," he began. His voice was steady, measured. "I was misdiagnosed with a life-threatening condition. In that moment, I made a decision driven by fear. Fear of what would happen to my children if I wasn't here." A pause. "I chose to test the people closest to me." He didn't soften it. He didn't hide it. "I understand the confusion and concern this has caused. For that, I sincerely apologize to my employees, my partners, and everyone affected by my actions." There were no excuses in his tone, only accountability. "But I will not apologize," he added, his voice firming slightly, "for ensuring my children's safety." That line lingered, and for many, it explained everything. Returning to business was easier than expected. Leonard Ellington had built systems that didn't collapse in his absence. His leadership team had held the structure steady. Investors, once reassured, fell back into place. But Leonard returned different. More present. More intentional. He delegated more, but not because he wanted distance. Because he knew exactly where his time mattered most. Home. The mansion felt alive again, not with noise, but with purpose. Routine returned. Breakfasts came back. School mornings, bedtime stories, laughter echoing down hallways that had once felt too quiet. And one familiar face returned as well. The nanny. When Leonard called her, he didn't over-explain. "I need you back," he said simply. There was a pause on the other end. Then gently, "The kids? They need stability," Leonard replied. "And someone who never treated them like an afterthought." She came back the next day. Malia ran to her first. Malik followed, less expressive but just as relieved. And Leonard, he noticed the difference immediately. Not just in the children. In the house itself. It felt right again. One evening, weeks after everything had settled, Leonard sat on the back patio with Malik and Malia. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in warm gold and soft orange. Malia leaned against him, half asleep. Malik sat beside him, quieter than before, but stronger in a way Leonard recognized. "Dad," Malik said. Leonard looked at him. "Yeah, you're not going anywhere again, right?" Leonard didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he understood the weight of the question now. "I'm here," he said finally. "For a long time." Malik nodded once. That was enough for him. Leonard looked out toward the horizon, then back at his children. He had built wealth. He had built success. But none of it mattered the way this did. Being there. Present. Consistent. Real. He had tested the world around his children. And what he found had forced him to redefine everything. Not just who he trusted, but what truly mattered. Leonard placed an arm around both of them, pulling them closer. And this time, there was no fear behind the moment. No uncertainty. Just a quiet, steady promise. He would raise them, protect them, and stay, until they no longer needed him to. Finally, we have come to the end of this story. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, do well to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.